The night was quiet in the small suburban neighborhood. The kind of silence where you could hear sprinklers ticking in the distance and the faint hum of crickets under the moonlight. But for me, quiet nights always carried a heavy weight. Was on nights like this years ago when I had lost everything: my father, my sense of peace, and the only place that had ever truly felt like home. That pain never really goes away. It just hides in your chest until someone or something rips it open again. And that's exactly what the HOA did. I wasn't some troublemaker or outsider. I had grown up in this very town, running through these streets as a kid, fishing in the small lake tucked behind the houses, and watching fireflies glow in the summer nights. My dad, a veteran and a man respected by everyone, built our home with his own hands. It wasn't just a house, it was his. Promised that family would always have a place to belong. When he passed, that promise became my responsibility. I thought I could protect it. I thought I could protect my family. But then the HOA arrived, and suddenly people I had never met were telling me how to live on my own land. At first, it was small things. Letters in the mailbox, complaints about my truck being parked too visibly, even though it sat neatly in my own driveway. Notices about my lawn being too natural, when in truth, it was just grass growing the way grass does. I ignored most of it. After all, what harm could a few cranky neighbors cause? But I didn't know the kind of power-hungry people who hid behind the name of Homeowners Association. They didn't just want control, they wanted obedience. And then, that night came. I had just gotten home from work, tossing my jacket onto the old wooden chair by the door when my daughter ran up to me. Her face was pale, her little hands shaking as she tugged at my arm. "Daddy, there's police outside," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. I froze. My mind immediately went dark. Police? At my house? I stepped onto the porch and saw them three. Men in dark uniforms, shiny badges clipped to their chests, and flashlights cutting through the yard. They looked official at first glance, their belts heavy with gear, radios crackling at their sides. But something about them was off. Their boots didn't match, their vests looked cheap, and their cars, plain black SUVs with no lights, no markings, sat idling at the curb. My training kicked in. These weren't real cops. One of them barked at me. "Step off your porch, sir. You're under arrest for non-compliance with HOA regulations." His voice was loud, meant to intimidate. My daughter gasped behind me. My blood boiled. Compliance with HOA regulations. That wasn't even a thing. You couldn't arrest someone over grass height or a mailbox color. They were bluffing. But the cruel smirk on the man's face told me everything I needed to know. They thought they had found an easy target, some local man too scared to question authority. They had no idea who I really was. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't blow my cover. For years, I had lived quietly, my true work hidden from neighbors who thought I was just another 9-to-5 dad. But I wasn't. I was a federal agent, working cases that most people couldn't even imagine. I had gone undercover in gangs, infiltrated criminal networks, and brought down men far more dangerous than these wannabe enforcers in fake badges. But now, they were standing on my land, scaring my family, pretending to hold power over me. Made this personal. On what grounds? I asked, stepping forward. My voice was steady, but my heart pounded. Failure to comply with HOA orders, the man sneered. "You're a repeat offender. Your lawn, your truck, even the way your fence is built, it's all in violation. The board voted. You're coming with us." Behind him, the other two shifted, hands resting on their hips like they were ready to grab weapons. My daughter started crying, her small sobs tearing through me like knives. I turned slightly, lowering, my voice to reassure her. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's got this." When I looked back at them, I saw it clearly, the arrogance, the hunger for control. The sheer audacity of men who thought they could play cops just because they wore knockoff uniforms. They weren't just harassing me. They were setting an example, showing the neighborhood what happened if you didn't bow to the HOA's iron fist. But they had chosen the wrong man. I stepped down from the porch, meeting their eyes one by one. "You boys think you're cops?" I asked quietly. The leader puffed his chest, smirking as if he held all the power. "We don't think," he shot back. "We are." That was the moment something inside me snapped. I had played their game long enough, ignoring letters, shrugging off petty fines, hoping they'd eventually get bored and move on. But this was war. And unlike them, I knew exactly how to fight. I raised my hand slowly, pretending to comply, watching their smug faces relax as they thought they had me under control. But inside, I was already planning my next move. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know the resources I had. And they sure as hell didn't know that by stepping onto my land and threatening my family. They had signed their own destruction. Because this wasn't about lawns or trucks anymore. This was about dignity, about justice, about showing them. That fear only works until it's met with someone who isn't afraid. And I wasn't afraid. That night was the beginning. The first shot in a battle that would tear open the truth about the HOA, expose their corruption, and bring every last fake cop, every power-drunk board member, to their knees. But before justice came, there would be heartbreak, betrayal, and a level of revenge they would never see coming. They thought they were hunting a local, but what they didn't know was that the man standing before them was more dangerous than they could ever imagine. And I was just getting started. The men didn't leave that night. They stood in my yard for nearly half an hour, shining flashlights at my windows, scribbling fake reports on clipboards, and making sure the whole neighborhood could see. Curtains twitched across the street. Porch lights flicked on. Neighbors watched silently from behind glass, not daring to intervene. That was the power of fear. The HOA thrived on it. They counted on people staying quiet, too scared to risk being targeted themselves. When the SUVs finally pulled away, my daughter was still trembling in my arms. I tucked her into bed, brushing her hair back gently. She asked me a question. "I'll never forget. Daddy, are we going to jail?" My throat tightened so much I could barely answer. No child should ever have to carry fear like that, especially not in their own home. I kissed her forehead, whispered that no one would ever take her daddy away, and sat awake long after she fell asleep. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. I wasn't just angry at the fake cops. I was angry at myself for letting this go on so long, for pretending that ignoring them would keep us safe. My father had raised me to stand tall, to protect what was ours. He had once told me, "Son, evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile and hands you papers to sign." But it's the same evil, all the same. I hadn't understood back then. Now I did. The next morning, the HOA wasted no time. A bright orange notice was nailed to my door. Final warning, property seizure pending. Bold letters. Threatening words, signed by the so-called board president, Richard Harper. I crumpled it in my fist, my jaw tightening. This wasn't about lawn height or trucks anymore. This was about breaking me, forcing me to sell, to run, to surrender. But they had no idea I was a man trained to fight wars, both visible and invisible. And I was ready to make this personal. I called in a favor that morning. A friend from the bureau, someone I trusted with my life. His voice was cautious on the other end of the line. "You're telling me they impersonated law enforcement?" Full uniforms, badges, radios, fake patrol vehicles. They tried to arrest me in front of my kid. Silence stretched on the line before he muttered, "That's felony territory." Impersonation, intimidation, possible racketeering. I leaned against the porch railing, watching the street where one of the HOA enforcers slowly cruised by in his SUV. He slowed down, smirking at me like he owned the place. My blood boiled hotter. "I'm not just building a case," I said quietly. "I'm ending this." That day, I started digging. The HOA claimed to be a legal board, but their paperwork was riddled with holes. Their bylaws had never been filed with the county. Their security team wasn't licensed with the state. And Richard Harper, the smug president, had a trail of lawsuits behind him, small contractors unpaid, families bullied out of their homes, liens placed on properties with no legal grounds. It was a web of corruption, spun so tightly that most families just gave up fighting. But I wasn't most families still. Exposing them would take time. And time wasn't something my daughter's heart could spare. She jumped every time a car slowed in front of our house. She refused to play in the yard, too afraid of the men in uniforms. Watching her innocence slip away because of these cowards nearly broke me. At night, I sat by her bed, making silent promises that no matter what it took, I would restore her safety. 2 days later, the HOA escalated. It was Saturday morning, and I was fixing the old fence my dad had built years ago when I heard footsteps crunching on gravel. I looked up to see 4 of them, same fake uniforms, same smug grins. But this time, they weren't pretending to arrest me. They carried bolt cutters and a clipboard. "Step aside," one ordered, gesturing to the fence. "The board voted to remove your non-compliant structure." My grip tightened on the hammer in my hand. "This fence has been here for 30 years, I said slowly. "It's not going anywhere." The leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, smirked. "Then you're obstructing official HOA operations. That's another fine, another violation. We warned you. Next step is property seizure." Behind me, I felt my daughter's eyes on my back. She was standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. My heart ached, but I forced myself to stay steady. This wasn't just about me anymore, right? This was about every family. Too scared to push back? "You're not officers?" I said, stepping forward. My voice was calm, but each word was sharp as glass. "You're criminals, and you just walked into a trap." They laughed, exchanging glances like I was some fool. "Big words," Scarface sneered. "But we run this neighborhood. You're just a problem that won't go away." I let the silence hang, then smiled for the first time. "That's where you're wrong." What they didn't know was that I had wired my yard with hidden cameras 2 nights ago, capturing every second of their intimidation. Their fake badges gleamed under the sun, their threats recorded in crystal clarity. This wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition. But I wasn't satisfied with just catching them. No, I wanted them to feel what my daughter felt. The fear, the helplessness, the weight of being trapped by someone who thought they held all the power. They thought they owned this neighborhood. I was going to show them they owned nothing, so I let them cut the fence. I stood there, arms crossed, watching as they yanked the old wooden panels out, laughing like children breaking a toy. Every snap of wood sent fire through my chest, memories of my dad hammering those boards with his calloused hands flooding back. But I kept my rage contained, because this was bigger than one fence. This was about strategy. When they finally left, leaving the broken fence piled in my yard, I walked inside. My daughter's eyes were red, her cheeks wet with tears. I knelt beside her, my voice steady, even though my insides were burning. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "do you remember how Grandpa used to say that bullies only win when good people stay quiet?" She nodded slowly, clutching her rabbit tighter. Well, I said, wiping her tears, we're not going to be quiet anymore. That night, as the moon rose high over the broken fence, I sat at my desk, typing up reports, organizing evidence, and making calls to people who could make things happen. Every click of the keyboard felt like a step closer to justice. The HOA thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had broken me down. But all they had done was light a fire that would burn everything they had built, and soon the whole neighborhood would see what happened when you pushed the wrong man too far. Sleep became a stranger to me in the days that followed. Every night, the sound of engines idling outside my house kept me awake. The fake HOA cops took turns parking their unmarked SUVs down the street, headlights flashing into my windows, making sure I knew I was being watched. My daughter barely slept either. She would creep into my room at midnight, curl up beside me and whisper, "Daddy, they're back again." I'd hold her close and stroke her hair, forcing myself to stay calm while rage boiled inside me like molten iron. I couldn't let this destroy her childhood. I couldn't let her think the world belonged to men who wore fake badges and preyed on fear. My father had fought real battles so his family could live free. I wasn't about to dishonor him by letting paper tyrants and imposters tear us down. The first strike had to be silent. They thrived on intimidation, but they weren't expecting anyone to fight back with intelligence. They thought I was just a regular Manan, angry father with no power beyond his own fists. They didn't know I had years of training in surveillance, counterintelligence, and a network of allies who answered my calls. I started small. Hidden cameras in my yard were already catching every stunt they pulled, but I expanded it. I planted a small wireless mic inside the broken panels of my fence, right near the path they always walked during their late-night patrols. I set up trail cams in the trees by the lake, disguising them so well no one would notice. Within 3 days, I had hours of recordings, men in fake uniforms trespassing, threatening, even bragging to each other about how much money they squeezed from other families on the block. But the most chilling part wasn't the threats. It was the laughter. They laughed about driving a widowed mother to tears when she couldn't pay an assessment fee. They laughed about forcing an old veteran to sell his home because he didn't paint his shutters the right shade of beige. They laughed about me, about my daughter, like we were their entertainment. Each recording fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every family in this neighborhood, every person who had been too scared to fight. Back to my first real move came on a Tuesday morning. While most of the neighborhood was at work, I walked into the HOA office, a converted model home on the edge of the subdivision. The receptionist, a nervous-looking young woman, froze as I entered. She knew who I was. Everyone did. "I need to speak to Harper," I said flatly. Her hands trembled as she stammered, "Ha." The president is busy." Before she could finish, the door behind her swung open. Richard Harper himself emerged, tall, sharp suit, fake smile plastered across his face. He looked me up and down with that same smugness I'd seen 100 times already. "Well, well," he said smoothly. "Mr. Trouble, what can I do for you?" I held up one of the orange violation notices. "You can explain why you're sending armed men to my house pretending to be police." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Our compliance officers are fully authorized. If you don't like it, maybe you should reconsider whether this neighborhood is the right fit for you." My fists itched to break his smirk, but I kept my voice calm. "Those aren't compliance officers. They're criminals impersonating law enforcement, and I've got proof." For just a second, his eyes flickered fear, buried quickly under arrogance. "Proof?" Kay asked, feigning amusement. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "Every word they've said, every threat they've made, every fake badge they've flashed, it's all on tape." His jaw tightened, but he smiled again, patting my shoulder like we were old friends. Careful with accusations, neighbor. Defamation is a serious thing. You wouldn't want to dig yourself into a hole you can't climb out of. I stepped back, meeting his gaze without flinching. The only hole being dug is the one you're standing in. Leaving the office, I knew I had rattled him, but men like Harper didn't go down easy. He wouldn't back off, he'd double down. And that was exactly what I wanted. That evening, as I grilled dinner on the back porch, my daughter finally smiled for the first time in weeks. She chased fireflies in the yard, her laughter soft but healing. For a moment, it felt like life could be normal again. But then, a shadow crossed the fence line. A figure stood there, half hidden in the trees, watching. I locked eyes with him, recognizing the scar across his cheek. Scarface, one of the fake cops. He smirked, tapped his fake badge, and vanished into the dark. My daughter didn't see him, and for that, I was grateful. But I knew what it meant. The HOA wasn't intimidated by my warning. They were watching closer, tightening their grip. Harper wanted to show me he wasn't scared, that he was still in control. That was fine. Let him think that. The louder they got, the harder they'd fall. 2 nights later, I staged my counterattack. I waited until the fake cops were on their usual patrol, parked in front of another family's house. From the shadows, I filmed as they harassed an elderly man about his illegal garden gnome collection. Their threats were sharp, their laughter cruel. When they finally drove off, I slipped a flash drive into the man's mailbox containing footage of everything they had just said the next morning. Whispers spread. A neighbor called me, voice shaky but hopeful. We saw what you sent. Is it real? It's real, I said firmly. And I'm not stopping until they're finished. For the first time, someone besides me dared to push back. The old man refused to remove his gnomes. A mother down the street ripped up her violation notice and threw it in Harper's face. The HOA wasn't used to resistance. I could feel the cracks beginning to form, but cracks in corrupt empires never come without consequences. That night, while I tucked my daughter into bed, a brick smashed through our front window. Shards scattered across the floor. Taped to the brick was a note scrawled in thick black marker. "Leave or else," my daughter screamed. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as she sobbed into my chest. Every tear that fell onto my shirt hardened my resolve. Enough was enough. If they wanted to threaten me, I'd expose them. If they wanted to scare my daughter, I'd make them fear me. The HOA thought they could break us, but what they didn't understand was that they had just created the storm that would drown them all. And I was done waiting. The shattered glass from the brick still lay on the living room floor the next morning. I swept it into a pile, every scrape of the broom against tile sounding like nails on a coffin. My daughter sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the front door like she was waiting for it to burst open. She hadn't spoken since the scream that ripped out of her when the window broke. I crouched beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Sweetheart, you're safe here. I promise you that." Her voice cracked like it hurt to speak. But what if they come inside next time? That question buried itself deep into me. It wasn't just the fear in her voice. It was the way she didn't believe in safety anymore. A child should never feel that way. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tighter than ever before. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just fight this quietly anymore. The HOA wasn't going to stop. They wanted a war. I'd give them one. The first step was turning whispers into voices. I had already given the neighborhood a glimpse of the truth, but fear still chained most of them. So I went door to door at the Jenkins house. A tired-looking mother cracked the door open, her eyes darting nervously. I showed her the footage Harper's enforcers laughing about squeezing her for money over her non-regulation swing set. She gasped, covering her mouth as tears welled up. "We thought we were the only ones," she whispered, "at the Martinez home." An old veteran sat stiffly in his chair, cane leaning against the wall. His voice shook with anger as he watched the fake cops brag about forcing him into selling his pickup. "I fought overseas for this country," he muttered, fists clenched. "And now I've been scared out of planting a damn garden in my own yard." One by one, the families opened their doors, and one by one, I showed them the truth. The shame in their eyes turned into anger. The anger turned into resolve. By the end of the week, what had been a neighborhood ruled by silence became a neighborhood buzzing with murmurs of rebellion. But Harper was no fool. He saw the shift. His smile at HOA meetings grew sharper, his threats more venomous, and his fake cops started doubling their patrols, shining spotlights into homes at midnight, pounding on doors with bogus warnings. It was his way of saying, "I still own you," except he didn't own me. Friday evening, I called a meeting at my house. Neighbors slipped in quietly, one by one, eyes scanning the street before they stepped inside. We crowded into the living room, the broken window covered now by a sheet of plywood. My daughter peeked down from the stairs, watching silently, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms like a soldier's shield. I stood before the group, the weight of their fear pressing down on me. These weren't warriors or agents. They were families, mothers, fathers, retirees, kids who just wanted to ride bikes without being stopped by fake cops demanding ID. They needed someone to lead, someone to carry the fight for them. I cleared my throat. "I know you're all scared. So am I, but fear is exactly what Harper feeds on. It's what gives him power, and the only way to break that power is to stop." Being silent, murmurs spread through the room. A man in the back spoke up. "But what can we do? He controls everything." I shook my head. "He doesn't control the law. He doesn't control the truth. I have recordings, evidence more than enough to bring his whole operation down, but I can't do it alone. I need all of you to stand with me when the time comes." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the veteran, cane in hand, pushed himself to his feet. His voice was hoarse but strong. "I've spent enough of my life letting bullies win. You've got my support." One by one, heads began to nod. A mother squeezed her husband's hand and whispered, "We're in." The room filled with agreement, soft at first, then louder, until it wasn't murmurs anymore. It was resolve. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. But hope didn't erase danger. That night, after everyone left, I heard the crunch of tires outside. I pulled back the curtain just in time to see Harper himself standing at the curb, hands in his pockets, staring at my house. His smile glowed. Under the street lamper predator's grin, he didn't need words. The message was clear. "I know what you're doing." I didn't flinch. I let him see me watching. Then I stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, staring him down. For a long, tense minute, neither of us moved. Finally, he turned and climbed back into his car. But I knew this wasn't retreat. It was a warning. The next morning, that warning arrived. A letter slipped under my door, sealed in a plain envelope. I opened it slowly, my pulse steady but heavy. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words scrawled across it. "Your daughter isn't untouchable. My..." Knees almost buckled. The room spun. Every ounce of rage I'd been holding inside exploded all at once. They wanted to scare me with fines. I could handle that. Threats against my house, I could stomach that. But the second they dragged my daughter into this, they crossed a line they could never uncross. I held that paper in my hands until it crumpled, the words digging into my palms like burns. My daughter came down the stairs, rubbing her sleepy eyes, asking if breakfast was ready. I shoved the paper into my pocket before she could see it, forcing a smile I didn't feel. That smile faded the second she turned away. My heart hardened into something cold and sharp. Harper thought he was winning. He thought intimidation was still his weapon. What he didn't realize was that he had just given me the one thing I needed most: a personal reason to bring him down. No matter what it cost me. The war was no longer about fences, lawns, or fake tickets. It was about my child. It was about protecting her future. And I was willing to burn Harper's entire empire to the ground if that's what it took to keep her safe. That night, I made my final call to the bureau. My voice was steel. It's time. Pull the files. I want everything on Harper and his people. We're not waiting any longer. The storm was coming. And this time, Harper wouldn't see it until it tore everything he had apart. The letter stayed, hidden in my pocket for days, but its words haunted me every second. Your daughter isn't untouchable. Every time she laughed, every time she skipped through the yard, I saw the shadow of danger hovering behind her. I checked locks twice before bed. I walked her to school with a watchful eye, scanning every car that passed. I became the kind of father I never wanted to be: paranoid, stiff, always waiting for the worst. But that paranoia gave me focus. Harper had drawn his line in the sand. Now it was my turn. The bureau didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, files started pouring in. Harper's name was tangled in dozens of shady shell companies, funneling money from association fees into his personal accounts. The fake cops. Half of them had criminal records: fraud, assault, even one with a history of impersonating officers, and somehow Harper had them all on his payroll. He wasn't just running a homeowners association. He was running a Rakita machine built on fear and extortion. I spread the documents across my dining table late into the night, my daughter asleep upstairs. Each paper, each photo, each transaction was another nail in Harper's coffin. But I wasn't satisfied with just building a case. Cases take months, sometimes years. Families in this neighborhood didn't have that long. I needed to break Harper's grip now, force his empire to crumble from within before he realized the noose tightening around him. So I set the trap. First, I leaked small pieces of information, just enough to stir paranoia. Anonymous emails with screenshots of their patrols landed in Harper's inbox. Envelopes with copies of falsified fines appeared on the doorsteps of his enforcers. They didn't know where it came from, only that someone was watching. Within days, the fake cops started snapping at each other during patrols, suspicion eating at them like rot. Second, I turned the neighborhood louder. I encouraged families to stop hiding, to push back in small ways. One woman refused to pay her violation fine and taped the notice to her window for everyone to see. A retired teacher painted his shutters a bright red, blatant defiance of HOA rules. Every act of rebellion was like gasoline on Harper's carefully controlled fire. And third, I went after Harper's pride. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up early, sitting quietly in the back while neighbors filed in. Harper strutted at the front, his usual arrogance dripping from every word as he lectured about order and standards. His fake cops flanked the walls, hands on their belts, trying to look intimidating. Then I stood. "Mr. Harper," I said, my voice carrying through the room, "how do you explain paying convicted criminals to act as police in this neighborhood?" The room went silent. Harper froze for a split second, then chuckled, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "That's a wild accusation, mister." I didn't let him finish. I held up a stack of papers, thick and damning. Criminal records, bank transfers, photographs. You've been running an illegal security operation under the HOA name. That's not order. That's organized crime. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One neighbor muttered, "I knew it." Another whispered, "We're not crazy after all. Harper's mask cracked, his face flushed red, his hand slamming the podium. "This meeting is over," he barked, his voice louder than necessary. His enforcers stepped forward, ready to escort people out, but the crowd didn't move. Not this time. They stayed, eyes locked on me, waiting. I leaned closer to Harper, my voice low but sharp enough for the room to hear. "You threatened my daughter. You crossed a line you can't erase. And now, everyone here knows the truth. Your time is over." For the first time, Harper didn't have a smirk. He had a glare, cold, hateful, rattled. He stormed out of the room, his fake cops trailing behind him, but the damage was done. The seed of rebellion had grown roots. That night, I tucked my daughter into bed, her soft breathing finally steady for once. As I watched her sleep, I realized this war wasn't just about taking Harper down. It was about giving this neighborhood back its soul. People had been living as prisoners in their own homes for years, too afraid to plant flowers or let their kids play outside. If I could break Harper's empire, I could give them freedom again. But Harper wasn't going down quietly. 2 nights later, the retaliation came. I had just sat down to dinner with my daughter when headlights flared through the front window. I stood, peering out, and saw 3 SUVs blocking my driveway. Doors opened. Men in fake uniforms spilled out, flashlights cutting through the night. Scarface was in the lead, his smirk as sharp as the scar itself. "Come out, hero," he shouted. "Harper wants a word." My daughter's fork clattered to the floor. She clutched my arm, eyes wide with terror. I crouched, holding her close. "Go to your room, lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming, and bolted upstairs. I stepped onto the porch, calm, collected. Inside, cameras were rolling, every second captured. "You? Boys sure like playing dress-up," I said, my tone cutting. Scarface laughed, but there was tension in it. "You think you scared Harper with your little papers? Nah, you just made him angry." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You got a nice kid. Be a shame if something happened while you were busy pretending to be a hero." The rage inside me roared, but I didn't flinch. I leaned in until our faces were inches apart. "The difference between me and you?" I whispered. "I don't pretend." For a flicker of a moment, uncertainty flashed in his eyes. Then he spat on the ground, motioning to his men. "Let's go." They piled back into the SUVs, engines roaring. As they tore down the street, I stood there, fists clenched, chest heaving. They wanted me to break. They wanted me scared. But all they had done was prove how desperate Harper had become. And desperation makes men sloppy. I went inside, sat at my desk, and started writing the final report for the Bureau. Everything was in place, evidence, witnesses, recordings. Harper thought he was untouchable, but he had built his empire on lies. Lies don't survive the truth. The only question left was how much he would lose when it all came crashing down. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, but no light could pierce the heavy weight sitting on Daniel's chest. He sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in front of him, staring at the silent phone. Across from him, Emily rubbed her eyes, exhaustion written on her face, while Ethan played quietly with his toy truck on the floor, far too subdued for a boy his age. The laughter in their home had faded in recent weeks, replaced by whispered worries and the haunting echoes of pounding on their front door at night. The fake HOA cops had poisoned everything, and even though Daniel had exposed them as their retaliation was relentless. Property damage, threats, anonymous letters slipped into their mailbox. It was a constant war of nerves. Last night had been the breaking point. Emily woke up screaming after the sound of footsteps on their porch. Daniel had rushed outside with his weapon, only to find a dead crow nailed to the wooden railing. Its wings spread wide like a cruel warning. His blood had boiled, his hands trembling not from fear but from rage. These people weren't just testing his patience. They were trying to destroy his family's peace. And that was the line they should never have crossed. Daniel, Emily's voice cracked, pulling him out of his thoughts. "We can't keep living like this. It's tearing us apart." Her eyes shimmered with tears, and Daniel felt his throat tighten. She wasn't blaming him, not really, but the weight of responsibility pressed hard. He had chosen this house, this neighborhood, believing it would be their safe haven. Instead, it had become a battlefield. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I promise you, Em, I'm ending this. No more waiting, no more hiding. They wanted a fight, they'll get one." His voice carried a steely finality, one that even Emily couldn't argue with. She only nodded, squeezing his hand as if trying to transfer her dwindling strength into him. That afternoon, Daniel drove into town. Not in his old truck that everyone recognized, but in an unmarked black sedan pulled straight from the agency motor pool. His cover was slipping anyway, and the HOA thugs had already made their move. It was time to remind them who he really was. He met with a trusted contact in the federal office, someone who had worked with him on past operations. A man who knew how to cut through red tape when the situation called for it. Daniel laid out everything. The imposters in uniform. The threats, the dead crow. The fear seeping into his family's life. Sounds like domestic terrorism on a small scale. His contact said, leaning back in his chair. And if they're impersonating law enforcement, we're looking at serious federal charges. You want me to light this fire officially? Daniel shook his head. Not yet. If we come in heavy-handed now, they'll scatter, and half of them will disappear before we can nail them. I want them all at once, every single one. His jaw clenched, and his eyes burned with determination. But I need backup when I move. The real kind. You've got it. His contact replied without hesitation. With the first piece in motion, Daniel turned his attention back to the neighborhood. That evening, he walked the streets like a soldier surveying enemy lines. He noticed things others wouldn't: patterns, signs of coordination, subtle markers etched into fence posts and mailboxes. This wasn't random harassment. It was organized, controlled, almost militarized. Whoever led this group wasn't just a petty bully. They had discipline, and that made them even more dangerous. By the time he returned home, night had fallen. Emily was putting Ethan to bed, humming softly, her voice trembling as though she was forcing herself not to cry. Daniel kissed his son's forehead and stood at the doorway, watching them with a hollow ache in his chest. He swore silently that, no matter what it cost, he would give them back their safety. Hours later, while the neighborhood slept, Daniel began setting his trap. He set up discreet surveillance equipment on his property, cameras hidden in gutters, sensors near the fence, and a motion-activated recorder near the porch. If they came again, he would have evidence so airtight it could bury them. But that wasn't all. He also placed small, nearly invisible markers in the street, things only he could read, that would tell him when and how his enemies moved. Just past midnight, the first sign came. A pair of headlights rolling slowly, too slowly, past his house. Daniel sat in the dark living room, gun resting on his lap, eyes sharp as a hawk. He watched the car pause at the curb, then creep forward. His jaw tightened. They were scouting again, pushing the boundaries. He didn't move, didn't give them the satisfaction of reacting. Not yet. The next morning, a letter was waiting on the windshield of Emily's car. Daniel picked it up before she could see it. The paper trembled in his hand as he read the words. Written in bold, jagged handwriting, "Leave now or the next knock at your door won't be a warning." His vision blurred with anger. But he folded the note carefully and slipped it into a folder with the others. Each threat was evidence, each act another nail in their coffin. That evening, he called a meeting with a few trusted neighbors, the ones who had quietly expressed their own frustrations with the fake HOA cops but were too afraid to act. They gathered in Daniel's garage, speaking in hushed voices. An older man named Carl spoke up first. "They slashed my tires last month because I didn't pay their so-called security fee. I didn't know what to do. They scare everyone into silence." "They won't scare us much longer," Daniel said, his tone cold but reassuring. "But I need your help. When the time comes, I'll need witnesses. People who are willing to stand up and say enough is enough." There was hesitation, but also a flicker of hope. One by one, they nodded. The group that had been living under fear was ready to if someone strong enough led the way. Later that night, as Daniel sat alone in the garage, studying the map of his neighborhood and marking possible choke points, he felt a strange calm settle over him. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About proving that no one could terrorize families and hide behind fake authority, as he pinned the last marker on the board. His phone buzzed with a message from his federal contact. "We're in position. Just say when." Daniel stared at the words, a dark fire in his eyes. The endgame was approaching. And when it came, the fake HOA cops would finally learn what it meant to cross a federal agent who had nothing left to lose. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on me as I stood before the jury. The HOA board members sat at the defendant's table, their smugness stripped away, their lawyers whispering desperately into their ears. Karen, the self-proclaimed president, refused to look at me, her gaze locked on the table like if she ignored me, all of this would vanish. But it wouldn't, not this time. I had carried the weight of their harassment, their threats, their false arrest. And tonight's justice was going to be written into stone. The prosecutor asked me to speak, and for a moment I hesitated. My throat tightened, and all the pain of the past months washed over me. My family in fear, my neighbors humiliated, my dignity trampled. But then I looked out into the gallery and saw Sarah, her eyes red but filled with pride, and behind her, my son, who looked at me like I was a hero. And maybe, just maybe, I could be. So I spoke. I told them about the night fake cops dragged me from my home in front of my wife and child, claiming HOA law gave them power. I told them about the bruises on my wrists, about the cold cell they locked me in, about the threats to take my land if I didn't bend to them. The jury shifted uncomfortably, some of them shaking their heads in disbelief. But the truth, raw and unpolished, cut deeper than any lawyer's speech could. The defense tried to twist it, say I resisted, to say the HOA acted in the interest of the community. But when the FBI agent I worked with testified showing hidden camera footage, recordings of their threats, evidence of bribes, and lists of homeowners they had extorted, the defense crumbled. Gasps filled the courtroom. One juror covered her mouth in shock. Another glared at the HOA table with disgust. When the verdict came, the world seemed to hold its breath. Guilty. Guilty on every count: fraud, impersonation of officers, extortion, unlawful imprisonment. The judge's gavel hit the bench, echoing like thunder. Karen collapsed into her chair, tears streaking her heavily painted face. The others hung their heads, their futures gone. Prison awaited them. But my victory wasn't just about punishment, it was about freedom. Outside the courthouse, neighbors gathered, clapping and cheering as I walked out. People who once avoided me, fearful of HOA retaliation, now embraced me. An elderly man with tears in his eyes shook my hand and whispered, "You gave us our lives back." Sarah wrapped her arms around me, trembling as if releasing all the months of fear in one embrace. My son hugged my leg, whispering, "Daddy, you're stronger than them." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. The HOA was dissolved, stripped of every ounce of power. The neighborhood, once divided by fear, began to heal. Families laughed together again. Kids rode bikes down the street without being yelled at. The lake, once restricted, opened back to everyone. The fences came down, and with them, the walls between us. But for me, justice wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. I rebuilt what they tried to destroy. My ranch became a safe haven, my home filled with laughter instead of fear. Yet sometimes, at night, I would stand on the porch and stare at the stars, remembering the night they dragged me away. The anger still burned, but it was no longer a fire that consumed him. It was a flame that reminded me why I fought. Months later, the town honored me in a quiet ceremony. The sheriff pinned a medal on my chest, calling me a guardian of justice. But what meant more was the look on my wife's face, the pride in her eyes, and the way my son clapped louder than anyone. That was the justice I fought for. Not medals, not recognition, but the safety of my family and neighbors. And though Karen and her board would sit in prison cells for years, their power gone, their empire shattered, my story wasn't about them anymore. It was about Usta people who stood together, who refused to be broken, who turned fear into courage. So when I look back, I don't just see the pain or the betrayal. I see the moment we took our lives back. I see a community free again. And deep down, I know one thing for sure: fake cops, fake power, fake threats. None of it could ever stand against the strength of real justice. And that is how the HOA, who thought they could own me, destroy me, and silence me, ended up crushed beneath the very law they tried to abuse.